Hi, I'm a bit of a technophobe, so there's no video, there's no computer. This is paper, for those of you who remember paper. I'm going to try not to refer to that too much. We go from the cutting edge to the incredibly ancient. And I want to talk about old things and handmade things and new things and the ways in which I am a geek. I don't know about the rest of you, but over the weekend, Maureen Dowd had a column in the New York Times entitled "Two Betches." It was the very first time that I had seen a Latin opinion piece in the New York Times, and I was thrilled. And I actually had a 17-year-old friend staying with me, and she and I sat together and read the article and had a blast doing that. I'm delighted that all things old are new again. We're on the set for The Dreams of Antigone, which is a piece that I wrote, and I'll talk more about that a little bit later. There is a purposeful collision of the ancient and the modern that you can see in the setting. We have described a place that is a contemporary excavation of an ancient Greek theater at an ancient Greek temple. And the reason is because everything that has happened in classical civilization is happening to us at this particular moment in our civilization today, and so has a profound impact on how we think. I really want to talk actually about the notion of reclaiming the story and reclaiming stories in small rooms like this one. For those of you who were here 2 years ago, you heard me rant on about television, as I am wont to do, and its excesses. Also in the New York Times, I guess I'm part of the liberal elite in this country. Also in the New York Times, Bob Herbert yesterday had a piece that was called "Amusing but Not Funny." And I don't know how many of you are familiar with Neil Postman's seminal sociological treatise called "Amusing Ourselves to Death." It was published somewhere in the early 80s. Postman talked about how television in particular and much of international media was going to be the death of both local culture and our culture broadly. There's a follow-up book that came out a couple of years ago that's not Postman's book, but I think is related. It's called "Bowling Alone: The Collapse and Revival of American Community" by Robert Putnam. I hope you've all read that. Putnam talks about the fact that bowling, he uses bowling as a metaphor, that bowling alleys were places where people from across economic and cultural spectra could come together in an activity that didn't require you to be very athletically inclined. You could be good at bowling and good at nothing else. My father was actually a championship duckpin bowler, so I know that. But there was a way in which a bowling alley was a community space, a place for random interaction, which had its impact on the larger community. One of the things that I fear greatly about our culture is that we lack places for random interaction. We isolate ourselves from other people. We stay at home and turn on the television. We spend our time with our Blackberries and our Palm Pilots. We sit on airplanes next to people that we never talk to. We plug in our iPods and our earphones. We tune out. We walk by each other in malls, and we never even say hello. The end of democracy, ladies and gentlemen, resides in that kind of isolation and resides in a place where random interaction, where random connection to other people that you don't have any reason to know or like or care about does not exist. The theater, I know this is 90% self-aggrandizement, but I'll say it anyway. The theater is one of the last places in our culture where these kinds of random interactions can occur. You come in, you sit down next to people that you may not like, that may not share your beliefs, and you experience something together. One of the things that we've done here at Trinity over the last 3 years is we've instituted post-show discussions after every single performance. So that if you come and see a show here, you can stay afterwards and talk back, not to an expert, but with your fellow audience members. So the discussions are led by a community member. What's been fascinating is over the last 2 months, as we've done this show, the numbers of talkback participants has gone up. We have about 30% of the audience staying after almost every show to talk back. You can decipher what that number means, but I think it's significant. That sort of handmade interaction between people, people talking to people versus networks talking to networks, right, is the kind of thing that's lacking in our culture, and I think is something that we're hungering for in the 21st century. We've also, you may not know this, but Trinity Repertory Company has programs that impact students in 60% of Rhode Island's schools. Okay, our one little theater has that kind of a broad reach. Now, that's been since I've gotten here. Our goal is 100% of Rhode Island's schools. We're on our way to that, but that has to be part of how we see ourselves. And this is, in my mind, the main radical shift that has to take place amongst art makers in this country in the 21st century. We have to stop thinking of ourselves as high priests and priestesses of some sort of sacred form, and remember that, in fact, art making is a democratic urge, a cultural imperative, a way to bring people together, and a way to have conversations about things other than ourselves. I think that's really important and really significant. I've done a couple of radical things here since I got here, two of which are new, and the jury's still out. We tried a radical form of creation for this particular project. I was the writer of record who brought in a script about 2 months ago. I had a room full of 12 actors and a director. And I described the process like this. Have you ever visited an oceanarium when they feed the sharks? And they throw a little bit of chum out into the water, and the sharks come up and they start to pull, and everything is bubbling and roiling, and the sharks swim away, and little pieces are left floating on top of the water. And then someone comes out with a net and scoops those pieces up. In that net was what was left of my script after the first 3 days of rehearsal. Now, some writers would find that incredibly challenging. The model in the American theater for the last 30 years has been the notion that the writer goes off to his or her lonely garret, composes something astonishing, and then comes in and dumps it on the heads of the actors as if it's marble or some other substance. This is no longer a way to create something, in my mind, that is vital, integral to the conversation of the moment, of the now. So we've taken this ancient story, which has an ancient frame, and we've made it new. It begins with the words, by the way, "we the people." And there is a chorus, which is spoken by all of the actors, that references some of our documents of our country and ties that into the way that we see the ancient story. That kind of creation is only possible if you are willing to efface self and allow a sort of free-for-all, but a productive free-for-all that moves toward a single goal. That's not something that's being done broadly in the American theater. It's something that we're doing here. We did it once and successfully. Now we'll see if we can do it again, because we don't know if we can. The other thing that we've started doing is a radical shift in marketing and development. We are, and I think my director of external relations is somewhere in the room, and he always has a little bit of a fit every time I talk about this. We are eschewing mainstream media for the most part as a way to get our message out. We are trying to create social networks, people talking to people, as a way to motivate ticket sales, as a way to motivate giving. I feel very strongly that if we remain in a ticket transactional, or erase that, a transactional relationship with our audience, we will fail. That's again, that's the death of culture, is if culture is something that you purchase. What we're trying to do is to enter an ownership relationship with our audience and our funders, so that it's not something they buy, it's something they already own. And if they own it, then we have a way to make them pay for it, right? I mean, it's your house, you pay for the repairs on the house. If it's a house that you only visit every once in a while and someone says the roof's leaking, that's your problem, right? So there's a fundamental philosophical shift in the way that we're pursuing marketing and fundraising. We have just begun these efforts this fall. The jury's still out because, of course, then it all went to hell about 2 weeks ago, and it's very difficult to know what are the effects of our efforts and what are the effects of the economy. But we have, in fact, if you come and see the show tonight or tomorrow night, we have very few tickets left. So it's selling well with this new marketing strategy. We did events a month ago where we would invite people. We'd get a 20% return on the invitations. They were events where we brought people together, we talked directly to them, and then half of the people who would come to those events would buy tickets. So it was a very successful model. We have not figured out how to follow all the way through with that, so that this is going on with continuity, and so I'm still working on that. So in a lot of ways, what we're actually moving toward is a more ancient way of thinking about ourselves as a theater. I love what the ancient Greeks have to tell us. This is the way in which I'm a nerd. The ancient Greeks felt that their culture was a way in which they could moderate discussion, right? So you attended a play in ancient Greece to negotiate the social contract. The very simple example that I give is you have to remember that the Athenian society was a newly post-tribal society, right? They're still trying to figure out what it means to live together. There's about 150,000 people living in Athens in the 4th century BCE, and 65,000 of those are citizens. And they're still trying to figure it out. So they all go to the theater together, 15,000 at a time, and sit around and watch about how it's not good to kill your father and sleep with your mother, okay? Which feels like it's self-evident to us, but at the time, it was still a little bit up in the air. And part of what the Athenians did was negotiate what their social contract would be. A more complicated and interesting example is that the Greek playwright Aeschylus had a play called The Persians. Okay? The Persians was his first big hit in Athenian Greece. And Aeschylus was a foot soldier in the war against the Persians, right, which had lasted and been a very bloody, long war between Greece and Persia. Aeschylus wrote his play from the point of view of the defeated Persians. Now think about that. In a post-tribal society, an artist is choosing to take the side of the defeated enemy. We would have that kind of that kind of depth of feeling today in our culture. It's a remarkable moment. So the social contract is being negotiated and renegotiated. And I feel that it's time for, in our culture, particularly in rooms like this one, to get away from the notion that culture is dictated by the sweep of the international media, but instead to begin a dialogue with the people in the room around how that culture can be redefined. Mark just said a very provocative and wonderful thing. Fix public education by shutting down private schools. And I couldn't agree more, especially because I hear all the time, well, you can't put enough money into the public school system to fix it. Well, actually, you put money in the private school system, and guess what? It fixes it. So I agree with you. I would love to have that conversation happening around plays that are going on in this room. So there's a way in which, if you come to see our work, you're at the beginning of a dialogue, not at the end receiving point, which is what you get with the television. I just have one, I'm going to wrap up. There's a quote that I love that is both germane and out of the water, but here we go. The American archaeologist Howard Winters said, "Civilization is the process in which one gradually increases the number of people included in the term we or us, and at the same time decreases those labeled you or them until that category has no one left in it." And the power of small rooms and small groups of people is not to be forgotten, is not to be diminished. I really feel that as we move into the 21st century, reclaiming the story, and the story told from one person to another person, is going to be the way forward. So thanks for your attention, and thanks for being here.